Hi guys! Today we're diving into the deliciously weird world of ancient Roman junk food. From garum-soaked fried cheese to honey-glazed cheese balls, crunchy roasted chickpeas, and even decadent stuffed dormice. You'll learn how these on-the-go snacks fueled soldiers and civilians alike, discover the rituals behind Saturnalia treats, and uncover the surprising luxury eats of Rome's elite. If you're as excited as we are to explore these mouth-watering morsels from history, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Comment below which Roman snack you'd dare to try. Picking up from our overview of ancient Roman snacks, let's dive straight into the bustling world of the thermopolium, the ancient equivalent of today's street food stall. Imagine yourself navigating a crowded insula, the narrow lanes alive with merchants hawking wool slaves, carrying amphorae of wine, and children darting around wooden carts. Amid this lively chaos, your eyes are drawn to a low stone counter set into a shop front wall. This is a thermopolium, plural thermopolia, literally a place where something hot is sold. It represents not only a practical response to the Romans' urban lifestyle, but also a social hub where people from all walks of life converged for quick, affordable meals. In this first extended exploration, we'll trace the origins, design, culinary offerings, and cultural resonance of the Roman thermopolium, setting the stage for our next stop on this gastronomic journey. Picture the sun blazing down on a Roman street as you approach a thermopolium adorned with painted frescoes advertising the day's specials. Braised dormice, lentil stew, or spiced sausages. The stone counter is embedded with large dolia terracotta jars sunk into the surface and filled with steaming foods. Behind the counter, a shopkeeper ladles steaming broth or scoops slices of fried cheese into a customer's bowl. Patrons ranged from wealthy traders seeking a quick bite between business meetings to weary laborers grabbing lunch before returning to the building site. For a handful of asses or a denarius, you could enjoy a nourishing, piping hot meal without the hassle of dining at home or needing domestic staff. In essence, thermopolia democratized access to cooked food in the densely packed cities of the empire. The architectural design of a thermopolium was both functional and emblematic of Roman pragmatism. Typically, the shopfront featured a wide doorway flanked by supporting columns. Inside, the dolia were built directly into the masonry counter and connected to a network of channels that allowed residual heat from an underground hearth to keep the dishes warm. This ingenious system meant that even after the central fire had died down, the heat radiating through the stone and ceramic kept the food at serving temperature for hours. Some higher-end thermopolia boasted decorated counters with colorful mosaics or painted stucco panels signaling a proprietor's wealth and taste. Even in the humblest settings, however, the simple, clean lines of the counter and the practical layout underscored the Romans' mastery of urban planning and food service. The sheer diversity of offerings in a typical thermopolium testifies to the complexity of Roman culinary culture. On any given day, you might choose from garum-spiced stews, which featured cuts of meat or fish simmered in a broth enriched by the ubiquitous fermented fish sauce. Alternatively, there were globuli, small balls of fried cheese served in honey, or crisp chickpeas tossed with salt and herbs. For meat lovers, assortments of sausages, lucanica flavored with pepper, coriander, and wine, were a staple. Vegetarians could savor pulses like fava beans or lentils cooked with onions and herbs. Even desserts found a place here, dates stuffed with nuts drizzled in honey and dusted with poppy seeds. Such a menu, accessible at street level, illustrates how thermopolia catered to varied tastes and dietary needs, much like modern fast casual restaurants. Central to many, thermopolia was the use of garum, the fermented fish sauce that the Romans adored. Made by fermenting small fish like anchovies in salt. For weeks or months, garum added a powerful umami punch to dishes. In the thermopolium context, it was often mixed into stews, sprinkled atop grilled meats, or even included in dipping sauces for fried snacks. Patrons would sometimes bring their own jars to top off a meal with their favorite blend. The pungent aroma of garum wafting through the stall was a smell to which Romans became as accustomed as we are to the scent of street cart coffee today. It underscored the centrality of strong, savory flavors in the Roman palate, and marked the thermopolium as a sensory hotspot in any neighborhood. Beyond filling stomachs, thermopolia were vibrant social spaces. Families might gather for a modest celebration, sharing platters of snacks and discussing the latest chariot race results. Business associates negotiated deals over bowls of stew, while freedmen caught up on the city's gossip. Slaves on errand duty paused to exchange news with their masters. The absence of formal dining utensils in many stalls diners often ate with their hands or used simple wooden spoons encouraged a casual atmosphere where hierarchy was temporarily set aside in favor of communal enjoyment. In short, the thermopolium was more than a convenience. It was a democratizing forum where the social pulse of the city beat loudest. Archaeological excavations, particularly in Pompeii and Herculaneum, have preserved dozens of thermopolia in extraordinary detail. In Pompeii's Regio Life, archaeologists uncovered a remarkably intact stall with bright red plaster walls, geometric floor mosaics, and 8 embedded dolia still containing traces of food residue. Analysis of carbonized bits revealed traces of chickpeas grains and even shellfish, offering a window into the daily diet of ordinary Romans. Inscriptions painted on the walls advertised menu items and prices, demonstrating that marketing techniques are hardly modern novelties. By studying the spatial arrangement, graffiti, and residue chemistry, scholars have reconstructed not only recipes, but also consumption patterns, trading routes for ingredients, and the economic underpinnings of street food culture in antiquity. The cultural significance of the thermopolium extends beyond its culinary function. It represented the Romans' embrace of convenience in an era when urban populations soared. While elite Romans often employed multiple cooks and slaves to prepare elaborate banquets at home, the majority of city dwellers lacked kitchens or time for domestic cooking. Thermopolia filled this gap, enabling thousands to obtain warm, varied meals affordably. Moreover, these stalls contributed to the urban economy. They created jobs for cooks laborers to collect firewood, potters to manufacture dolia, and traders to supply ingredients from across the empire. In this way, the humble thermopolium was a nexus of social, economic, and cultural exchange. Drawing a parallel to today, modern street food markets in cities like Bangkok or New York echo many aspects of the Roman thermopolium. Both serve hot, ready-to-eat dishes to busy patrons. Both occupy prime foot traffic locations, and both rely on communal counters, social buzz, and a diverse menu to thrive. Yet, unlike many contemporary vendors, subject to strict health codes, Roman thermopolia operated in a more laissez-faire regulatory environment, sometimes at the cost of hygiene. Graffiti scrawled on counters warns of contaminated garum, and archaeological evidence suggests occasional outbreaks of foodborne illness. Still, for Romans, the thermopolium remained indispensable, a testament to the enduring appeal of accessible communal dining. As we wrap up our deep dive into the thermopolium, keep in mind how this simple street stall laid the groundwork for today's global street food culture. From its practical design, stone counters, embedded dolia, and ingenious heating systems, to its varied menu and social function, the thermopolium encapsulated the essence of Roman urban life. Next, we'll explore how a single ingredient garum reigned supreme in Roman cooking, shaping flavors and forging trade networks across the Mediterranean. But for now, imagine yourself standing at that low stone counter spoon. In hand, surrounded by the clamor of the city, as you savor your first taste of ancient Roman street cuisine. Leaving the bustling thermopolium described in Point 1, you catch a briny scent laced with melting butter. In a side alcove, a vendor in a soot-smudged tunic tends a bronze pan over coals, dropping grape-sized balls of sheep's cheese into hot oil. They hiss bloom golden and land on a plate that gleams beneath an early drizzle of garum, the fermented fish sauce Romans adored. Coins clink as customers press close. Nothing delivers faster comfort than cheese crisps bathed in liquid umami. In Latium's high pastures, dawn-milked sheep give curds that shepherds press salt and mix with coarse flour and pepper. The dough is rolled into neat globuli, dusted with crushed coriander, and left to set. By the time the baskets reach the city, each ball is sturdy enough to brave a pan of olive oil, yet soft enough to ooze when bitten. Apicius praises the technique, noting that frying locks in moisture while creating a crust fit to carry any sauce. The result is portable protein, a perfect commodity for vendors working cramped urban corners. Garum, that final flourish, begins far from Rome. At shore factories in Baetica and Mauritania, laborers stack tiny fish with solar salt. In clay vats, weight them and let months of heat turn flesh to amber liquor. When the mash oozes, clear workers strain it, pour it into amphorae stamped with a dolphin logo, and ship it upriver to the Tiber docks. Dealers dilute cheap grades for taverns, while gourmets pay dearly for undiluted floss florum, the flower of garum. Why pair pungent sauce with mild cheese? Garum's glutamates ignite dairy fat, amplifying flavor into something ethereal. Romans lacked the term umami, but knew its punch. Pliny bragged that garum awakens the dulled palate, and crowds agreed. A thin drizzle cracks the crust, floods the creamy center with brine, and leaves pepper warmth dancing on the tongue. Skeptics often returned for second helpings before the pan cooled. Scenes around the frying pan blurred Rome's strict social ladder. A senator's nephew robes hitched to dodge splatter, squeezed beside a dock worker counting copper asses. For a few greasy breaths, both savored the same luxury. Humorists seized the image Juvenal mocked a miser who drops his last globulus into a gutter and wails louder than Niobe. Moralists complained that garum-flecked lips weakened discipline, yet the scented queue only grew longer. The snack underpinned a miniature economy. Shepherds, potters, fishermen, sailors, and tavern owners all earned a cut. When olive yields fell, vendors thinned oil with rendered fat. When victories poured silver into the city, they sprinkled pricier garum and raised signage boasting double sauce. No regrets. Pompeian graffiti captures the hustle. Our globuli beat poetry, try 3. Technique followed demand. Early cooks fried over naked flames that scorched quickly. By Nero's reign, many had adopted perforated iron grates and bronze pans with sloped sides, letting excess oil drain and crust stay delicate. Some lined the pan with vine leaves, adding faint herbal scent. Others experimented with goat milk curds for sharper tang. Yet none dared skip garum that would invite public outrage louder than a missed gladiator blow. Doctors joined the chorus. Galen warned fried foods caused heaviness, yet praised garum for stirring sluggish digestion, gifting vendors the perfect sales pitch: indulgence with benefit. Festivals embraced the combo. During Saturnalia, hosts passed platters of fried cheese drizzled with garum and honey, symbolizing abundance. Temple priestesses offered miniature balls to household gods, praying for healthy flocks and safe fishing land, and sea united in one mouthful. As the recipe traveled, locals tweaked it. In Antioch, garum blended with cassia. In Narbonensis, it was stretched with grape must. On damp Britannia's frontier, authentic Hispania. Garum cost a fortune, so officers flaunted a mere spoonful the way modern diners brandish truffles. Thus, garum-soaked fried cheese distilled the thermopolium's spirit, quick, democratic, unforgettable. One bite combined empire-wide trade kitchen innovation and the simple human hunger for pleasure. Savor that mingled taste of pasture and tide, because our tour of Rome's street snacks continues with a very different texture. The roasted chickpea crunch that marched beside legionaries and echoed in nighttime taverns. Picture yourself ordering you slide a chipped terracotta token across the counter. The vendor flips it with a practiced finger, and a moment later, a fresh globulus lands in a tiny wooden bowl. Vapor rises, carrying hints of oregano from the frying oil. You tear the sphere open. Molten curd stretches like silk before surrendering to the cool splash of garum. First comes salt. Next, a wave of dairy sweetness, then a slow pepper burn that lingers at the back of your throat. Around you, children giggle at sizzling pops while calculating how many globuli their allowance might buy. All of this is possible only because a sprawling supply chain hums beyond the city walls. At the garum factories of Carthago Nova, freedmen oversee vats the size of swimming pools. They track fermentation by scent, noting the day fishiness gives way to a deep, almost meaty aroma. Teamsters cart amphorae to coastal depots, where stevedores load them onto grain ships already bound for Ostia. A single cargo holds thousands of gallons, each barrel insured by guilds that guarantee delivery despite storms or pirates. Profits ripple outward. Dock taxes fill civic coffers, while merchants invest in new presses for olives, ensuring a steady river of oil back to the snack stalls. Not everyone applauds the craze. Stoic philosophers complain that garum enslaves the palate, urging citizens to return to plain porridge. Street poets lampoon gourmands who argue over sauce provenance, while the Republic's virtues erode. One provocateur stages a mock trial in the forum, accusing garum of murdering moderation. The audience roars as the defendant, a barrel painted with eyes, is condemned to be emptied into the Tiber. Yet even the loudest critics cannot ignore the queue snaking toward the thermopolium at dawn. So lick the last crystals of sea salt from your fingertips and reset your palate. Our next station will crackle, proving that crunch can be as addictive, equally enticing. Garum still tingles on your lips as you wipe the last sheen of cheese from your fingers and search the alley for something crisp. Across the way, a slender vendor in a smoke-streaked cloak rotates a bronze drum above charcoal. Every turn releases a nutty breath that replaces the fried aroma of Point 2 with the promise of dry warmth. She is roasting chickpeas, Cicer Araetinum, the snack that powered Rome's streets and legions. The brazier pops softly, like distant applause for her craft. At first glance, they look humble pea-sized beads the color of old parchment. Yet bite into one, and the shell shatters like thin glass, yielding a burst of earthy sweetness that instantly soaks up lingering grease. That double-act crunch, followed by comforting starch, made roasted chickpeas the perfect counterpoint to the oozing globuli you met moments ago. Chickpeas reached Italy long before Caesar dreamed of conquest. Traders from Carthage, Syria, and Sicily packed the shriveled seeds as ship ballast, letting them jostle in darkness until they arrived at the Tiber docks. Farmers loved the plant because it fixed nitrogen-refreshing fields exhausted by wheat. Philosophers praised it too. Aristotle wrote that chickpeas contain the vigor of the earth itself. Their resilience meant they could be stored for years, ready to revive whenever hunger struck. Roasting transformed endurance into pleasure. Vendors first soaked dry peas overnight in briny water, then dried them beneath the sun until the skins puckered tight. A drizzle of olive oil, just enough to help salt cling, coated every crease. The peas were poured into a perforated cylinder, and rumbled above glowing coals. An attentive ear mattered the faint click of a shell meant interior starch had puffed perfectly. A dull thud signaled burning. When hairline cracks spread across the batch, the vendor shook the drum, briskly showering the peas with crushed savory and sand-fine sea salt before tipping them into a woven basket that hissed with captured heat. For a pair of copper asses, you could buy a palmful. For a denarius, a full sextarius cup big enough for friends. No utensils required, only nimble fingers or the fold of a cloak. Patrons often chased a garum-dipped cheese ball with a shot of rough wine and then a handful of chickpeas, a cycle of slick richness and sandy crunch that Romans called playing the lyre strings of appetite. Soldiers swore by the pulse. A legionary's standard ration included over a pound of roasted chickpeas stored in his leather loculus. Unlike fresh bread, they resisted mold, and unlike bacon, they offended no gods on fast days. Marching 20 miles on cobbles, a soldier could chew a few swig water and feel steady again. Commanders liked them for tactical reasons. No flame, no smoke, no giveaway scent. An army could snack in silence beneath enemy walls. In the city, the peas were entertainment. At the circus, Maximus hawkers cried Cicer Caldus and poured steaming kernels into clay bowls painted with racing colors. Gamblers, too nervous to sit, paced the tiers crunching rhythmically while watching their wagered team surge toward the meta. Between races, children threw hot peas into each other's mouths, laughing when one bounced off a tooth and vanished underfoot. Chickpeas blurred social lines. A senator's daughter might nibble them from a silver plate at a dinner prelude, while a dock worker bought the charred dregs at dusk for half price. Doctors approved. Galen claimed roasted chickpeas strengthened the stomach without dampening the humor's advice tavern owners printed on wall placards to lure cautious customers. Playwrights mocked the legume's other reputation flatulence, which they blamed for windy punchlines that brought common laughter into marble theaters. The economics were mighty. Sicily alone exported hundreds of tons each harvest, filling cargo holds beneath grain sacks. Taxes on those loads refurbished aqueduct arches. Interest from merchant loans funded bronze statues in the Forum. Yet the street price stayed low because supply was ample and spoilage negligible, a rare balance in Rome's volatile market. When drought shrank, wheat yields chickpeas cushioned the urban poor, preventing bread riots more than once. Religion found room for them too. During parentalia, families left bowls of roasted peas on family tombs, believing the crackle guided ancestral spirits home. At Ceres' spring festival, priestesses scattered handfuls into sacrificial fires so that popping sounds mingled with flute notes, a staccato prayer for fertile soil. Even Epicure Apicius, more famous for dormice and flamingo tongues, included chickpea puree seasoned with lovage in his lavish banquets, proving that humble pulses could mingle with decadence. Roasted chickpeas also fed conversation. Street philosophers compared their hardness to the Stoic heart. Fortune-tellers read future journeys in the scorch patterns. Gamblers shook cups of peas before rolling dice, believing the dry rattle summoned luck. Graffiti in Pompeii advertises crisp Cicer best with new wine, while another scrawl teases, lose a tooth. Blame the bean that wished to be bronze. All this explains why chickpeas and fried cheese were usually sold side by side. One snack drew crowds with molten pleasure. The other kept them lingering with rhythmic crunch. Vendors understood synergy. The more people oscillated between stalls, the richer both became. Satira poets jested that Rome's stability rested on two pillars, law and legumes. As twilight settles and torch smoke curls above shop awnings, the day's last roast crackles in the drum. The vendor tosses a final pinch of salt, its grains gleaming like sparks against the browned shells. and hands over a scoop freshly sealed in a twist of parchment. You slip it into your pouch, feeling the warmth seep through cloth, aware that each tiny orb carries stories of farms, ships, soldiers, and gods. Keep munching as we drift from the realm of savory into the domain of sweet. A fragrant plume of honey and fruit rises from the next stall, where dates are being split, stuffed with nuts, and bathed in golden syrup. The roasted chickpeas' steady heartbeat will soon yield to the rich thrum of Dulia domestica proof that Rome's appetite, like its empire, knew no boundaries. Leaving the vendor's brazier with a satchel of still warm chickpeas tucked under your arm, you follow the sticky promise of honey through the evening crowd. Point Three's dry crunch lingers on your palate, so you crave something smooth, sweet and celebratory. An edible exclamation mark after the earthy pulse of roasted legumes. A few steps ahead, an aproned cook lifts a perforated bronze ladle, letting golden spheres tumble into a cauldron of bubbling oil. The hiss is sharper than the crack of chic pea shells and rises through the charcoal haze like sunrise breaking over tiled rooftops. The stall's sign reads Globuli Melita honey-soaked cheese fritters. Unlike the garum-drenched globuli you sampled earlier, these are confectioners' answers to soldiers' snacks proof that one humble curd can march two very different culinary roads. Where Point 2 paired dairy with the ocean's brine, Point 4 invites bees into the story, replacing salty bite with amber gloss. The cook, a broad-shouldered Sabine woman named Fadia, plucks each orb as soon as it floats, drains it on woven reeds, and drops it into a wide copper basin of warm honey. A fragrant steam curls upward, perfuming the night with notes of thyme and chestnut. Each cheese ball begins hundreds of miles away in hilltop pastures where shepherd boys split dawn's silence with reed pipes while coaxing their flocks. Morning milk sets with rennet. The curd is pressed salted and mixed with coarse ground farina to bind it. Eggs lend richness. A scattering of crushed anise seeds hints at distant spice roots. Kneaded to the texture of soft dough, the mixture is rolled between calloused palms into marbles that promise both crispness and melt. They travel in wicker crates down the Via Salaria, passing toll gates and shrines, before arriving at Rome's Porta Capena, where merchants bid for the best batches by smell alone. Honey, too, carries geography in every drop. Apiaries along the slopes of Mount Hymettus yield pale nectar tasting of sage. Campanian orchards produce darker, fruity syrups. Cilician highlands send casks redolent of pine. Roman gourmands debate terroir with the fervor modern critics reserve for wine. Fadia blends two types, a light floral variety to penetrate the crust, and a denser caramel-toned honey to cling as glaze. She keeps the mixture in a wide-bellied pot set over a low brazier, just hot enough to remain pourable without dulling fragrance. Technique dictates fate. Oil must be hot, yet patient shimmering rather than smoking. Too cool, and the globulus absorbs grease. Too fierce, and it blisters before the center warms. Fadia tests temperature. By flicking in a breadcrumb when it browns in a slow count of 5, she commits the batch. Bubbles lace the surface. The balls rotate gently, guided by convection. After exactly 3 dozen heartbeats, she snags the first and pierces it with a reed skewer. If the interior strikes a balance between custard and sunshine, the rest follow. Dunking is an art in itself. She submerges each fritter for the length of a prayer to Ceres, then transfers it to a marble slab where honey thickens to a lacquer that captures lamplight in trembling ripples. Finally, a pinch of cracked black pepper, a trick learned from Apicius, provides contrapuntal heat. Customers pay a tres asses premium for pepper's foreign fire, but few refuse. The spice turns sweetness from cloying to compelling. Crowds gather the moment the first tray appears. Children giggle as threads of honey stretch between fingertips. Matrons on evening strolls allow themselves one ball each, claiming it aids digestion. Soldiers finishing leave decide fritters. Beat fortress rations by every measure. Even stoic lecturers stern after a day praising temperance concede that honeyed globuli embody temperantia. Their richness discourages excess after only 2 or 3. Economically honeyed globuli knit multiple trades into one tapestry. Beekeepers supply wax for candles as well as nectar. Potters craft the dolia that store both oil and honey. Farmers grow the grain that fortifies curds. Spice dealers brave pirate-ridden waters to deliver pepper. A single bite thus tastes of empire. Apennine hills, African coasts, Anatolian forests, and Indian monsoons delivered by merchant sail. Festivals magnify their allure. During Floralia, globuli are flung from theater balconies to raucous crowds below their sticky landings, prompting laughter and impromptu wrestling matches. At Saturnalia, banquet slave and master switch roles, sharing platters piled high with fritters to symbolize the world turned upside down. The honey's golden sheen is read as a promise of returning light after winter's gloom. The treat's journey east and west spawns variations. In Alexandria, cooks scent the honey with rosewater. In Lugdunum, they add minced walnuts for texture. On the Danube frontier, soldiers substitute bear fat when oil runs short, producing a heartier smoky flavor that later generations will call barbarian beignets. Yet all descendants retain the trio of curd fry and veil of sweetness, an ancient formula that future zeppole and buñuelos will echo. As you bite, the crust gives way to molten cheese that mingles instantly with warm honey, coating your tongue, in a harmony absent from the salt-forward snacks before. The pepper sparks the anise hums, and a soft nuttiness from well-baked flour whispers beneath the chorus. You notice the roasted chickpeas you carried are suddenly quiet in your pouch, their earlier applause fading into a subtle bass line beneath the dessert's operatic crescendo. Finishing the last sticky morsel, you wipe your fingers with a scrap of linen and sense the market shifting. Torches gutter lower, and a cooler breeze carries whispers of dried dates and crackling hearths. Vendors ahead split glossy fruit slide almonds inside and drizzle fresh honey over the seams. You carry the memory of globuli on your tongue as we trade curd now. The sticky perfume of honey still clings to your fingertips as you edge away from Fadia's fritter stall. Point 4's molten sweetness lingering on your tongue like an after-dinner hymn. Yet the night market refuses to let you drift into complacency. Music from a one-stringed lyre mingles with the low hiss of charcoal, and a fresh, resinous scent beckons you toward a counter lined with polished bronze bowls. Inside, every vessel lies a treasure, no larger than your thumb dates, so dark they seem to swallow the torchlight each split, and stuffed with pale nuts that peek out like pearls in volcanic rock. This is Dulia domestica, the aristocrat of Roman street confections, and it will carry us seamlessly from Point 4's honey-drenched globuli into an even richer chapter of imperial indulgence. The vendor, a silver-haired Nabatean, whose family once guided caravans along Arabia's incense routes, works with the deliberate grace of a jeweler. He selects each medjool date from a basket cushioned in bay leaves, cuts a clean slit down its length, flicks away the pit, and slides in a blanched almond or a walnut, half depending on the customer's whim. Then, with a ladle smaller than a sparrow's wing, he drizzles just enough warm honey to glaze the fissure-sealing fruit and nut into a single decadent bite. A final roll through crushed black sesame seeds anchors the sticky coating and adds the faintest whisper of smoke on the finish. Compared with Point 4's honey-soaked cheese fritters, quick sizzling marvels born in oil, Dulia domestica is a quieter luxury. an exercise in controlled opulence, where globuli announce themselves with a hiss-stuffed dates speak in soft syllables, silk resin dusk. Their story begins in oases flanking the Euphrates, where date palms draw sweetness from unforgiving sand. Harvesters climb the trunks barefoot, cutting the heavy clusters before dawn to preserve the fruit's dew-like moisture. Packed in woven crates, the dates travel north on camel trains, cross the Fertile Crescent, and merge with the Mediterranean grain convoys that fill Rome's warehouses. By the time they reach the capital, each glossy pod has accumulated both literal and symbolic value: nourishment, exotic promise, and a whiff of the desert's austere romance. The nuts tell their own tale of conquest and cultivation. Almonds flourish in Hispania's sun-baked orchards, their pale blossoms the first to herald spring. Walnuts, meanwhile, trace their Latin name, Iovis glans. Jupiter's acorn to Persia before they followed legionaries into Gallia and Germania. In a single dulium, then the empire's geographic breadth collapses into one sweet savory axis: Arabia's dates, Hispania's almonds, Persia's walnuts, and Italy's golden honey converging in harmonious contrast. Every bite is a cartographic lesson rendered edible. Honey again plays the mediator linking point 5 to point 4, both in flavor and narrative. Yet here, it functions less as a bath and more as mortar and edible lacquer that fuses fibrous date flesh with brittle nut kernel. The vendor keeps 2 crockpots on a low brazier, one infused with bay and mastic for resinous depth, the other brightened with orange zest for a citrus kick, popular among younger patricians. Patrons distinguish themselves by their honey order. The way modern diners choose craft coffees, a senator might request mastic for gravitas, a poet orange for creative spark, and a mercenary. Whichever costs fewer coins. You buy a trio, paying a quadrant surcharge to mix almond and walnut in the same fruit, a small rebellion against culinary orthodoxy. As you take the first bite, the date's caramel folds around your palate, followed by the nut's crisp clarity, then a late bloom of herb-scented honey. The sweetness is darker than globuli's bright sting, like the difference between dusk and noon. Where point 3's roasted chickpeas offered a brisk staccato, and point 4's fritters sang legato dulia domestica plays an andante, its notes long low and lingering. Socially, these stuffed dates perform double duty. By day, they are posh fuel for scribes and advocates too busy to sit for a meal. By night, they transform into tokens of courtship. Lovers share them under colonnades, breaking each date in half to expose mirrored nut hearts, a silent pact sweeter than whispered vows. Physicians add their endorsement, claiming dates restore the inner fires and nuts fortify the seat of reason, making the snack both aphrodisiac and study aid. Even austere Stoics concede a single dulium aligns with metriopathia moderate indulgence, so long as one is mindful of quantity. Economically, the delicacy sustains a niche yet lucrative chain. Apicius records that fine dates fetch 10 times the price of figs, and a single amphora of Persian walnuts can fund a minor villa renovation. Beeswax byproduct feeds. Candle makers. Shattered nutshells become poultry feed. And surplus honey flavors cheap wine, creating mulsum sold to common taverns. Thus, dulia domestica amplifies wealth far beyond its humble scale. Festivals elevate the date from snack to sacrament. During the winter solstice, Saturnalia hosts scatter-stuffed dates across banquet tables, their open seams symbolizing the sun's promised return. The sticky sweetness models social bonds renewed in the season of misrule. At Jewish Purim celebrations in Rome's Trastevere district, dates replace Hamantashen's same triangular symbolism, different medium, while Persian traders mark Novruz by gifting jars of walnut-filled dates wrapped in silk a practice that merges Zoroastrian and Roman sensibilities. Yet the delicacy courts controversy too. Moralists accuse date vendors of catering to decadent appetites, claiming the fruit's dark flesh excites base passions. One satirist caricatures senators sneaking dates beneath their togas during Senate sessions, a sticky metaphor for hidden corruption. In reply, confectioners commission Poet Laureate verses praising the date as ambrosia that unites Earth's richest soils, effectively turning marketing into counter-philosophy. A tactic street hawkers plaster on wooden placards beside their price lists. As you finish your last Dulium night tilts toward deep violet. The chickpeas in your pouch have cooled. The honey of globuli now feels like a distant dream. But .5 stuffed dates lay a plush carpet for what comes next, a descent from sugar and spice back into savory realms, specifically the luxurious, borderline scandalous practice of fattening dormice for aristocratic banquets. The crowd's chatter shifts as a nearby stall owner scrapes iron tongs against a glazed clay pot, and the scent of sage-rubbed meat curls under your nose. You realize your culinary tour, like Rome itself, is a wheel ever turning between earth, sea, and sky, between vice and virtue, between what nourishes the belly and what feeds the soul. Stuffed dates have served as a bridge fruit of the desert nut of the orchard honey of the meadow, leading us onward to the empire's strangest table manners and most audacious appetites. The sweetness of Dulia domestica still clings to your palate as you drift deeper into the forum's torchlit maze. .5's desert orchard harmony, leaving your senses alert for the next sensation. It arrives not as perfume, but as a whisper of crisped skin and wild herbs, a scent so foreign to street fare that you pause mid-stride. Ahead, a marble-fronted stall displays a pair of mottled clay jars the size of wine amphorae, each pierced with tiny air holes and sealed by latticed lids. A small bronze sign reads, "Gliraria privata fat dormice, sold here." Thus begins .6 Rome's most notorious luxury snack, and a fitting foil to the refined stuffed dates you just enjoyed. Where the date vendor's work felt like delicate goldsmithing, the dormouse dealer resembles a stage magician presiding over a dark secret. He lifts one lattice, reaches inside, and withdraws a creature scarcely larger than his palm. Its fur a silvery brown, its belly swollen like a pocket full of coins. These are gliss woodland rodents, prized by aristocrats for their rich, buttery flesh. Months before market day, they are captured in the Sabine Hills and placed in gliraria cylindrical terracotta pots, outfitted with interior runs, feeding slots, and nesting chambers. In darkness, the animals grow torpid, gorging on barley beech mast and walnut paste until their hindquarters expand to twice their wild size. If stuffed dates condensed the empire's geography into one sweet bite-fattened dormice, distill its capacity for engineered indulgence, the vendor's preparation begins behind the stall's curtain, where an iron brazier glows crimson. Each dormouse is swiftly dispatched, skinned, and eviscerated with a surgeon's efficiency. Then the true alchemy starts. The cavity is packed with a forcemeat of pork mince, dormouse liver peppercorns, laser pythium resin, and the green tips of rue. A twine binding at the waist keeps the filling snug, while the carcass is rolled in honeyed wine, dusted with crushed almonds, a gentle echo of .5's nut accent, and skewered on a baywood spit. As the spit turns, fat drips into the coals, spitting sparks that rise like fireflies into the star-bleached sky. When the skin blisters and bronze flecks of almond cling to the glaze, the vendor declares the morsel ready. Presentation is part of the luxury. He lays the gilt dormouse on a miniature silver plate, shaped like a reclining panther, a whimsical wink at predators and prey. Patrons slice through caramelized skin to reveal pale pink meat braided with peppered stuffing. The first taste is shockingly delicate, softer than partridge, richer than suckling pig, and perfumed by bay smoke. A flicker of sweetness from the honey marinade places it on the same flavor continuum as the stuffed dates, yet the savory depth drives the experience into new territory, an edible thesis on Rome's willingness to transform nature itself in pursuit of pleasure. While globuli and chickpeas bridge social strata, fattened dormice draw strict lines. A single portion costs several sestertii a day's wage for a common laborer. Senators send slaves to fetch whole platters on credit. Wealthy freedmen buy one merely to flaunt newfound status. The poet Martial mocks such ostentation, describing a host who serves dormice to impress guests, yet skimps on seating cushions. In imperial kitchens, however, the dish earns pride of place. The Emperor Claudius reportedly capped a state banquet with platters of golden dormice resting on beds of rose petals, a culinary exclamation mark signaling Rome's supremacy over both field and forest. Economically, the trade sustains a narrow yet profitable corridor. Sabine trappers sell juveniles by weight. Potters specialize in glyraria, whose interior grooves encourage exercise-induced appetite. Perfumers supply spiced honey glaze, and coppersmiths craft shallow pans that capture drippings for oleum glerinum, a healing salve prized by elite matrons. Even the rodent's soft pelts fill niche markets as trim for children's winter cloaks. Thus, every squeak in the glirarium echoes with coin, yet ethical rumblings accompany the sizzle. Stoic philosophers condemn the practice as decadent cruelty, arguing that any society fattening creatures in darkness forfeits moral clarity. Pliny the Elder catalogues gliraria with scientific detachment, but admits private distaste. Seneca, hammering his point home, compares gluttonous diners to the animals they devour, both trapped in cages of excess. Their disapproval changes little. Demand only grows, and rural villas install dedicated dormouse towers adjacent to dovecotes. A living testimony that virtue rarely outpaces appetite. Culinary manuals nonetheless preserve the recipe's subtleties. Apicius recommends adding minced pine nuts to the stuffing for textural surprise, and finishing with a drizzle of defrutum, a reduced grape syrup, to balance pepper's fire. A physician named Cassius Felix claims dormouse fat, when combined with storax resin, cures chronic earache, a justification slaves recite when smuggling leftover scraps from aristocratic kitchens. Street butchers eager to emulate the elite introduce faux dormouse pork roulades, shaped and scored to resemble the little bodies. The public quickly dubs them Glis mendax, lying mouse, a cheaper thrill that nevertheless spreads the dish's mystique beyond patrician walls. Like stuffed dates, dormice appear in ritual contexts. During autumn's harvest festival, priests of Ceres offer 3 dormice and 3 figs on the goddess's altar, symbolizing land's bounty, both cultivated and wild. At certain wedding feasts, brides present grooms a dormouse stuffed with almonds representing fertility nuts contained within domestic order, the household pet now sustenance. This pairing echoes the date and nut metaphor of point 5, reinforcing Rome's fondness for edible symbolism. You purchase one modest specimen, youthful curiosity, outweighing moral quandary. The first cut releases fragrant steam. The second reveals a mosaic of pale meat and spiced pork. Honey glaze seeps into the stuffing, carrying whispers of the date stall down the street. As you chew, flavors bloom in stanzas: bay smoke, walnut, echo pepper, crescendo, and a final chord of forest earthiness that lingers like embers cooling on stone. It is, you admit indecently, good. Yet indulgence begets reflection. Watching the vendor load fresh dormice into glowing ovens, you recall the chain of hands that fattened, fed, and felled each creature. Your palate applauds, but your conscience tugs attention Rome herself seldom resolves. In that uneasy space, the market shifts again. A gust of night air brings briny aromas from nearby stalls, where baskets of fish heads and prawn tails await batter and sizzling oil. Stuffed dormice, with their engineered decadence, have carried us from Point Five's natural sweetness to the extremes of culinary artifice. Prepare to recalibrate your senses, for Point Seven will plunge us back toward the sea, into sizzling platters of battered seafood, whose humble bones echo Rome's earliest suppers on the Tiber's banks. But for now, the flavor of dormouse lingers, a reminder that the empire's appetite could inflate even the smallest creature into a monument of luxury, and that every bite we take is a vote for the kind of world we wish to build. The smoke of roasted dormice still swirls in your memory as you follow a fresh breeze sweeping through the forum. It carries a perfume quite different from Point Six's savory opulence, warm wheat melting cheese, and the unmistakable tang of slow-dripped honey. Ahead, a baker slides a flat leaf-lined loaf from a clay oven, its crust gilded to the color of late-afternoon sunlight. A handwritten placard proclaims Libum Dulcissimum, the sweetest honey cake. Where stuffed dormice flaunted engineered decadence, Libum offers comfort, older than the Republic itself, a culinary benediction that closes the night's indulgence with quiet grace. The baker Septima Cestius inherited her stall and its secret starter from a line of Vestal bakers who once prepared ritual breads for Rome's temples. She still honors that lineage. Each dawn she folds fresh sheep's milk cheese into finely sieved flour, working the paste until it yields a satin sheen. Eggs follow 3 for strength, prosperity, and long life. Then a spoonful of olive oil, fragrant with green grass. The dough rests beneath linen, while Septima sweeps her oven clear of wood ash, leaving a bed of glowing embers she tames with sprigs of laurel. The scent of bay drifts upward, ready to season the loaves from below. Unlike carn-stuffed dormice, Libum embraces simplicity. Septima shapes small rounds the size of cupped palms and presses each one onto a fresh leaf fig in spring bay, in summer chestnut in autumn, so the loaf absorbs a hint of season as it bakes. She scores a shallow cross on every top, allowing steam to vent and blessing each cake with an echo of the 4 winds. Once arranged on a paddle, the loaves slide into the dome, where radiant heat coaxes cheese to mingle with flour. 15 minutes later, the crust blisters and hairline cracks announce readiness. Septima lifts them to a marble counter and brushes their crowns with honey warmed just to the edge of bloom. The amber glaze seeps into fissures, sealing moisture and promising sweetness that hums rather than shouts. You bite while the loaf still sighs with oven breath. The crust breaks with a polite crunch, releasing a cloud of wheat aroma layered with laurel. Inside, the crumb is tender, half bread, half custard. Its dairy richness mellowed by grassy oil. Then honey arrives, not the swaggering drizzle that lacquered Point Four's globuli, but a thin gloss that catches torchlight in translucent ripples. Where dormouse skin yielded explosive flavor crescendos, Libum plays. Legato, a slow unfurling of grain milk and nectar that seems to settle the very pulse of the marketplace. Historically, Libum began life not as street food, but as sacred offering. Cato the Elder records it as Libum Sacrificium, a cake baked for household altars that the lares may taste prosperity. At weddings, priests broke Libum over the couple's joined hands. At harvest festivals, farmers buried a piece beneath the first furrow to coax fertile soil. Septima preserves those echoes at dusk. She sets aside the first loaf, still warm on a small cedar shelf facing east, murmuring a prayer to Vesta. Only then does commerce begin, yet piety and profit coexist. Libum's ingredient chain mirrors Rome's wider web. Shepherds herd flocks on Apennine slopes. Millers at the Tiber Quays power grindstones with mule tread. Apiarists from Etruria ship honey in cork-plugged amphorae. Potters fire leaf-impressed baking tiles that leave faint botanical skeletons on every loaf. Each cake sells for a single, as affordable even for a dock porter, yet vibrant enough in flavor to satisfy nobles craving nostalgia after lavish dormouse courses. For them, Libum is palate cleanser and emotional anchor proof that simplicity can still rival extravagance. Socially, the cake functions as edible diplomacy. Politicians distribute baskets of Libum during election season, banking on honeyed recesses to remind voters of childhood breakfasts rather than broken aqueducts. Mothers pack cooled wedges in children's satchels for long days at rhetoric school. Soldiers tuck them into sandal straps as lucky rations. Even philosophers content to dine on olives and water concede slices of Libum foster contemplation without clouding judgment. Its sugars release, gently fueling reason rather than riot. As you savor your second bite, honey clings to your lip. You recall Point Five's stuffed dates where fruit and nut merged with syrup into a token of courtship, and realize Libum performs a similar marriage of land to sky grain. From soil cheese, from animal honey, from airy pastures, laurel from eternal groves. Where dormice dramatized humanity, bending nature to whim, Libum showcases harmony ingredients left largely themselves, yet elevated through respectful craft. Septima offers a variant dubbed Libum Saturnale, larger ring-shaped, studded with pine nuts. She sells them only in December, when Saturnalia turns Rome upside down. During the festival, masters serve, slaves dice, decide kings for a day, and Libum crowns every household feast its ring, symbolizing the cyclical return of light. That seasonal exclusivity breeds long anticipation, proof that restraint can paradoxically magnify pleasure, a lesson your senses welcome after Point Six's relentless richness. Doctors ever Rome's taste gatekeepers lend Libum their blessing. Galen prescribes it warm for melancholy. The cheese provides digestible protein. The honey cheers blood, and the bay leaf clarifies phlegmatic humors. One inscription outside Septima's stall repeats his lines verbatim, a savvy advertisement in an age when medical authority travels as fast as rumor. Controversy still flickers at the cake's edges. Stoics shrug at its modest sweetness, but warn against letting ritual devolve into mindless habit. Epicureans counter that mindful enjoyment of Libum expresses gratitude for nature. Meanwhile, pragmatic merchants calculate profit margins, yields improve. If cheap cow's cheese replaces sheep's, yet flavor dulls, and discerning tongues complain. Septima refuses the compromise. Her family crest hangs over the oven, and tradition remains non-negotiable. You finish the last crumb licking honey from your thumb and feel a gentle calm settle over you, quite different from the animal heat after dormice. Around you, lanterns flicker, sending sparks skyward like offerings to invisible gods. Vendors douse coals. Patrons pocket their final purchases. But the market is not done with you. Down a quieter lane, a tavern lad empties stale loaves into a stone basin of watered wine, triggering aromas of must and spice. Tomorrow, those soaked slices will emerge reborn as Sopianum pointates humble bread and wine porridge that blurs the line between breakfast and brew. Libum then stands at a crossroads between sacred and secular simplicity, and indulgence day's labor and night's reflection. If dormice flaunted how far Rome could push luxury honey cakes, remind you how sweet ordinary gifts can taste when tempered by craft and time. As you walk away, the leaf that lined your loaf remains in your hand, a delicate green imprint of bay and wheat, promising that even in an empire of excess, small rituals still bind people to earth season and one another. Still warmed by the gentle sweetness of Septima's libum, you stroll toward the forum's outer edge, leaf-lined parchment rustling in your pocket like a keepsake of Point Seven's quiet piety. Night air cools the honey on your lips, and a deeper hunger stirs the kind that asks not for luxury or ritual, but for steady comfort. A dish to cradle body and spirit before dawn. A clatter of wooden buckets leads you to a recessed tavern where the signboard shows a loaf half submerged in a wine cup. Sopianum-soaked bread porridge awaits a dish as unassuming as the clay bowls stacked beside the fire, yet powerful enough to bridge farmhand and senator festival and battlefield. If libum offered harmony through restraint, Sopianum offers resilience through transformation, carrying the narrative from Point Seven's sacred sweetness into a realm where yesterday's leftovers become tomorrow's salvation. The tavern keeper, an olive-skinned Gaul named Marius, greets patrons with a ladle instead of a smile. His hearth holds a bronze cauldron big enough to bathe a child. Inside simmers a burgundy broth of diluted wine bay leaf and a fistful of cracked pepper. Atop the liquid float, ragged cubes of stale bread, cut from loaves unsold during the day, coarse brown for the poor, white panis candidos for the few who can afford it. As steam ghosts upward, the bread swells, drinks, and softens until each piece resembles a sponge saturated with sun-ripened grape and herbal spice. A quick stir breaks the cubes into a thick, spoon-coating slurry. A drizzle of olive oil lends sheen. A dusting of ground cumin whispers warmth. Marius calls it breakfast supper, and cure-all in one, though Romans embrace it under many names: Sopian for soldiers, Posca panis for sailors, Cerveza. Pauperum, the poor man's beer for tenement dwellers seeking cheap solace. Its origins lie in the legion's marching kit. A soldier's ration allowed for bread that hardened after a day's march. Soaking it in watered wine itself, safer than river water, revived texture and lifted morale. From campfires, the practice migrated to city taverns, where cooks saw profit in turning unsold loaves into hearty mush. Unlike Point Six's dormouse trade, which demanded specialized jars and months of fattening, Sopianum requires only leftovers and heat. This thrift explains its ubiquity in Subura's slums. Vendors ladle it at dawn to laborers paid by the day. In the campus, Martius bathers break their post-steam fast with bowls spiked with honey and pine nuts. On Palatine Hill, estate stewards serve it to night watchmen, believing its modest alcohol steadies nerves better than pure wine. Yet Sopianum is more than economical. It is deeply social. Patrons huddle on rough benches, elbows brushing strangers, as they curl fingers around earthenware bowls still slick with glaze. Conversation flows easily over spoonfuls, bread melts. Inhibitions soften, gossip thickens. In a city where hierarchies usually dictate seating and service, the porridge blurs lines. Artisans discuss chariot odds beside law clerks, copying contracts by lamplight. A senator's courier cloak, damp with urgency, trades rumors with a perfumer who scents the steaming air with frankincense from her sleeves. If libum connected earth and sky through ritual, Sopianum connects neighbor to neighbor through shared necessity. The recipe's variations map Rome's reach. In Lusitania, cooks enrich the broth with figs and wild rosemary. Along the Danube, they fortify it with venison fat to armor soldiers against frost. Egyptian garrisons substitute date wine when grapes run scarce. Marius favors a Campanian twist he stirs in a ribbon of de frutum grape syrup, reduced over hours until tar-like lending caramel depth that recalls Point Five's stuffed dates. Taste his spoonful, and the wine-soaked bread sighs into sweetness echoing libum's honey, yet tempered by pepper bite, a flavor profile that mirrors Rome itself, part indulgence, part pragmatism. Physicians champion Sopianum with caveats. Galen praises its digestibility, advising patients to sip it warm at dawn to raise the natural heat. Scribonius Largus, court doctor to Claudius, warns that excessive cumin may excite dreams. An observation tavern, raconteurs exploit billing extra cumin bowls as portals to prophetic sleep. Marius obliges grating a final flourish for patrons who drop an extra quadrans. Thus, even modest fare acquires layers of choice and personalization, reinforcing the idea that cuisine, however humble, remains theater. Economically, Sopianum stabilizes local markets. Bakeries sell yesterday's bread to taverns at modest discounts. Vintners offload subpar amphorae unsuitable for pure drinking. Oil merchants clear end-of-press dregs. The porridge thus forms a closed loop of resourcefulness, contrasting sharply with the luxury supply chains behind dormice and honey cakes. It keeps bellies full and tempers volatile grain prices, an edible shock absorber in Rome's often precarious urban ecosystem. Your bowl arrives rim-chipped surface, swirling like Jupiter's storm clouds. The first spoonful tastes of damp vineyard soil, kissed by autumn sun, grounding you after libum's airy grace. Bread shards still retain faint crust edges, offering gentle resistance before collapsing into velvet. Oil swims in amber crescents and pepper tickles the back of your throat, encouraging a discreet cough that draws sympathetic smiles from fellow diners. A woman across the table, her tunic patched but clean, raises her bowl in silent toast. You reciprocate. Feeling camaraderie bloom quicker than the heat spreading through your chest. Memories of Point Six's decadent dormice, flicker-engineered creatures fed in darkness skin, lacquered in honeyed wine. Now, the same wine watered and warmed dilutes extravagance into sustenance. The contrast reveals Rome's dual heartbeat, one half pounding toward excess, the other thrumming toward endurance. Even the leaf that lined your libum seems symbolic, now a reminder that food, like the empire, cycles continuously, each layer feeding the next. Yet Sopianum carries its own symbolism. Bread, cornerstone of Roman identity, surrenders its proud form to become fluid, proving adaptability crucial to survival. Wine, emblem of social pleasure and divine communion, humbles itself with water. Proving potency need not shout. Together, they create something new, modest, nourishing an edible philosophy of second chances. Patrons finish swipe rims with fingers and lick them clean, wasting nothing. The tavern keeper rinses bowls, swiftly already ladling portions for a new wave of arrivals, night watch poets, hunting quiet corners, lovers prolonging farewells. Outside, a distant vendor's cry pierces the hush. Lucanica fumans, smoking sausages. The aroma of coarse ground pork laced with pepper drifts up the alley. Bellies already soothed by Sopianum stir again, proving appetite's endless renaissance. Point 9. Beckons promising sizzling links that united soldiers on the march and citizens at festivals. Yet even as you rise, the warmth of soaked bread anchors you. Sopianum has bridged the gentle purity of libum and the meaty vigor to come, teaching that in Rome, as in life, sustenance is not only what fills the stomach, but what binds the past to the present, the elite to the humble, and the remnants of yesterday to the hopes of tomorrow. You ease your emptied Sopianum bowl onto the tavern's washboard. Point 8's wine-soaked warmth still coursing through your veins. Outside, dawn's first embers pink the eastern sky, sharpening every aroma that rolls along the cobbles. One scent rises above all pepper-spiked smoke, mingled with sizzling pork fat. It pulls you down a narrow wind, where a soldier's baritone hawk echoes between shuttered shops. Lucanica fumans, smoking sausages hot as Vulcan's forge, and thus point 9 begins weaving the pragmatic comfort of Sopianum into the muscular vigor of Lucanica Rome's beloved street-side sausage. Lucanica takes its name from Lucania, a rugged region of southern Italy, famed for hardy shepherds and spiced meat. Legend credits Lucanian legionaries stationed in Iberia with introducing the recipe to the wider empire. They minced pork, packed it into cleaned intestines, and smoked it over brush so it kept on long marches. Today, that martial intuition fuels civilian appetites from Britannia's mist to Alexandria's glare. The stall before you is nothing more than an iron tripod straddling a clay firebox, yet it beats like a furnace heart. Thick coils of raw sausage hang from a poplar rod, their casings stippled with fat. Lengths already sizzling on the grill gleam mahogany-leaking rivulets that hiss when they strike hot tiles below. The vendor Decimus Rufinus, a retired centurion, turns them with bronze tongs, whose jaws bear notches counting campaigns. Where Marius of Point 8 wielded a ladle, Decimus wields fire and steel. He greets you with a nod, splits a fresh loaf heel, and tucks a glistening link inside portable supper for a city constantly in motion. The smell alone conjures Legio Thris camp's ground shoulder and belly, folded with salt, garlic, fennel, coriander, cracked pepper, and a splash of vinum de frutum for tang. A hint of smoked bay leaf drifts up, tying the sausage back to Sopianum's comforting broth, yet promising bolder horizons. Bite once. The casing snaps a drum stroke, then yields to juicy crumble. Pepper fireworks ignite the tongue, quickly soothed by sweet pork fat, while fennel seeds sparkle like distant cymbals. Bread soaks escaped juices, echoing Point 8's theme of transformation. Once again, grain becomes vessel sopping life from savory liquor. If Sopianum whispered resilience, Lucanica trumpets endurance. Unlike dormice or honey-brushed cakes, Lucanica spans class boundaries effortlessly. Dockers break dawn fast with a halfpenny coil before unloading grain ships. Gladiators claim 2 links for post-bout recovery. Senators nibble coin-sized slices at midnight symposia when chilled Falernian begs for spice. Its allure is democracy encased. Economically, Lucanica unites multiple trades. Small farmers fatten pigs en masse. Butchers reserve shoulder and belly trimmings. Spice wholesalers funnel pepper from India, cumin from Syria, fennel from alpine meadows. Coopers craft smoke barrels that render oak and applewood into flavor. Decimus, ever the strategist, purchases Tuesday's unsold cuts below cost, grinds them at dawn, and sells out by noon, efficient as any legion supply chain. Technique matters as much as ingredients. Decimus soaks hog casings in sour wine to soften and sanitize. He keeps meat and fat cold chopping, not grinding, so diners taste distinct morsels. Salt binds proteins. Wine and spices perfuse. Links hang overnight in a cedar-planked box over smoldering grapevine trimmings. The gentle smoke stains casings bronze, while pepper oils bloom, marrying surface char to interior succulence once grilled. Culinary manuals preserve variations. Apicius suggests pine nuts and laser piscium for banquets. Provincial cooks add wild thyme. Greeks in Neapolis lace theirs with orange zest. In Gaul, chestnut flour extends mixtures during lean winters. Whatever the riff, 3 elements remain coarse pork, assertive spice, and smoke an edible triumvirate, as stable as Rome's own political ideal in theory at least. Health sages intervene as they always do. Scribonius warns gluttons that excess pepper inflames the bile, yet recommends small doses to cheer cold stomachs. Decimus exploits this paradox, advertising Lucanica as both fortifier and delight. He even hangs a tablet, quoting Galen Modica Saporis Varietas Nervis Prodest. A moderate variety of flavor strengthens the nerves. Patrons nod. Convinced balance lies somewhere between first and second helpings. Social theater unfolds around the grill. A lawyer rehearses defense arguments between bites grease stippling his wax tablets. A wagon driver trades gossip for an extra fennel burst endpiece. A Vestal acolyte accepts a discounted link Decimus's sly prayer for absolution of past sins. Smoke clings to tunics braids strangers into a fraternity of shared scent. Sopianum seated neighbors side by side. Lucanica sets them shoulder to shoulder, turning the alley into a mess hall. The sausage also moonlights as currency. During winter, grain shortages rural peasants pay urban relatives in cured coils that outlast bread. Night watchmen slip Lucanica to bribable gatekeepers. One graffiti outside the circus reads bet 2 sausages on the red faction odds 3-1. Even love notes sometimes swap roses for links. Accept this Lucanica hot as my desire scratches a certain Flavia to an unnamed gladiator. Yet Lucanica is not immune to critique. Stoics label its fiery relish a distraction from virtue. Ascetic sects call pig flesh impure. Nonetheless, even critics relent on festival days at Saturnalia households, string sausages over doorways like garlands, letting children yank them free in boisterous treasure hunts. In that role, Lucanica transcends sustenance, becoming celebration itself. You finish your bread-wrapped link fingers, glossy. The pepper afterglow mingles with Sopianum's lingering wine, and Libum's fading honey 3 chapters interacting on your palate like instruments in a symphony. Through that harmony echoes a larger truth. Rome's street food mirrors its empire, diverse, adaptive, relentlessly communal. Each stall expands appetite while closing some social distance. As Decimus flips a fresh batch, he sprinkles coarse salt that crackles like distant cavalry. The sun now crowns rooftops, gilding rising smoke. Beyond a fish cellar unfurls nets of anchovies destined for garum vats, heralding Point 10's forthcoming exploration of Lateria, the resilient wheat cakes that soak oil and sea salt alike. But for now, Lucanica lingers a bold stanza after Sopianum's gentle refrain, proof that spice and smoke can rally weary bodies, spark conversation, and march hearts forward long after the legion drums have faded. The last sparks of pepper from Decimus's Lucanica still prickle on your tongue as you step beyond the smoky lane Point 9's bold drums, fading into the rhythm of early morning foot traffic. Somewhere ahead, the odor of smoldering oak surrenders to a subtler perfume. Warm cereals, browning butter, and a faint flicker of sesame. You round a pillar and find a low brick kiosk manned by a pair of teenage sisters, Tullia and Marcia, whose practiced hands flip wide, thin cakes on an iron plate. Their sign etched in looping cursive announces Lateria Calida Hot Roman Wheat Cakes, ushering us into Point 10, where the martial vigor of sausage softens into the steady comfort of pancakes that fueled farmers, scribes, and gladiators alike. The transition feels natural after Lucanica's peppered bravado. Lateria offers a foundation, a carbohydrate ballast that tames lingering spice and prepares the body for a long day's labor. The batter begins at dawn when Marcia coaxes stone-ground emmer and sprouted wheat into a wooden trough, adding goat milk siphoned from a vendor 2 stalls away, duck eggs for richness, and a drizzle of sharp olive oil that will crisp the edges. She stirs with a willow whisk until ribbons form, then folds in a fistful of cracked sesame and a pinch of salt. A ladle of this mixture hits the sizzling plate with a hiss, spreading under its own weight into a lacy disc whose perimeter sets almost instantly. Moments later, Tullia slips a bronze spatula underneath, flicks her wrist, and thwop reveals a caramel brown underside mottled like a leopard's coat. What emerges is neither the pillowy pancake of modern breakfasts nor the wafer-thin crepe of distant Gaul, but something sturdier, a dense yet flexible round that demands good teeth and rewards them with nutty depth. Tullia places a finished Lateria on a terracotta tile to cool and brushes its surface with honey, thinned by warmed must, relinking us to the sweetness of points 4 and 7. For patrons nursing emptier purses, she offers a savory glaze instead, a thin smear of rendered pork fat, often the runoff from Decimus's sausages, sprinkled with sea salt and dried lovage. Thus, the cakes bridge sweet and savory worlds, absorbing flavors like parchment absorbs ink. You order one glazed with honey, and at Tullia's suggestion, stuff half a length of leftover Lucanica inside, creating a portable wrap that echoes today's street burrito. The first bite blends the sausage's spicy juices with the cake's toasted grain. Honey slips into cracks, binding heat and starch into a harmony that feels engineered for commuters trudging toward the river docks. Where Sopianum dissolved stale bread into wine broth, Lateria takes fresh batter and gives it shelf life. Cooled cakes harden slightly, turning almost leathery, allowing workers to pocket them for lunch, or soldiers to stack them in satchels as edible shields against hunger. Their popularity derives from frugality. Grain eggs and milk are common, so price stays within 2 asses, half the cost of a dormouse's lacquered tail. Yet the dish also courts sophistication. Apicius recommends adding pulverized pine nuts and a splash of sweet raisin wine for banquet versions. In Alexandria, cooks mix barley flour with date syrup, producing a darker, chewier cousin. Britannic garrisons fold in wild bilberries when the hedges blush purple, staining uniforms but lifting morale. The basic matrix grain liquid fat absorbs local identity wherever Rome plants its standard. Economically, Lateria knits together diverse suppliers. Millers on the Janiculum grind grain, shipped from Africa. Proconsularis? Shepherds from the Alban Hills deliver curdled milk skimmed and sold cheap. Oil pressers in Trastevere offload last season's pungent drabs, perfect for griddle work. Even sesame seeds have a journey. Caravans haul them from Syria to Puteoli, where they board barges up the Tiber. Every cake, then, is a miniature empire in concentric circles of commerce. Physicians grant cautious approval. Galen notes that sprouted wheat quickens the humors and suggests athletes eat Lateria 3 hours before competition for slow-release vigor. However, he warns excessive honey glaze may congest the chest. Tullia laughs off the admonition, insisting a spoon of honey keeps throats supple for market haggling. Stoics tolerate the cakes, praising their plainness, while Epicureans cite the crisp, chewy contrast as proof that pleasure need not rely on decadence. Cultural currents swirl around the griddle. During the spring festival of Ceres, bakers form Lateria into ear-shaped auriculae, honoring the goddess of grain. Children nibble them in the temple courtyard, scattering crumbs for pigeons considered sacred messengers. At military victory, parades vendors stack the cakes into towers, douse them with flaming brandy, and wheel them beside the triumphal chariot, an edible volcano symbolizing Rome's spreading power. Graffiti behind the baths of Caracalla records a baker's boast. My Lateria built biceps thicker than marble, a marketing claim legions of bathers happily test. You finish your cake, noting how its modest sweetness tempers the last traces of pepper and smoke, just as Sopianum once mellowed wine's bite. The sisters wipe their griddle with a laurel sprig, scenting the air with resin that foreshadows coastal breezes. For beyond the basilica's shadow, fishmongers ice small mullet and anchovy heads destined for hot oil, a clue to Point 11's forthcoming symphony of battered seafood, where land's grain will meet sea's riches in crackling union. But before moving on, you savor Lateria's broader lesson. Where Lucanica harnessed fire and muscle, these cakes showcase balance, solid yet yielding, humble yet versatile. They exemplify Rome's genius for taking the ordinary grain and heat and refining it into sustenance that travels effortlessly from farm to forum, from dawn labor to midnight feast. In a city forever teetering between extravagance and austerity, Letaria occupies the middle path, reminding even the most jaded palate that strength often hides in simplicity, and that the empire's foundation rests not merely on conquest, but on the quiet, daily alchemy of flour and flame. The last nut-brown crumbs of Letaria soften on your tongue as you follow a gust of briny air sluicing through the Forum Point 10's toasted grain, already whispering for a companion born of water. Around the basilica's flank, a line of market carts hugs the Tiber embankment, where fishermen unload wicker baskets still dripping with dawn tide. Here crackles Point 11, Fricta Marina Rome's battered seafood that marries the sisters' wheat cakes to the sea's restless harvest in a sizzling duet of flour and flesh. A boisterous woman named Vibia stands sentinel over a brazier half the size of a wine press. She stokes oak embers until they glow like garnets, then lowers an iron cauldron rings deep with olive oil sheen. Beside her wooden platters display every cut a thrifty cook might praise. Mullet heads split like blooming roses, silver anchovy chains coiled into rosettes, crisp skate fins, and tiny hole smelt no longer than a senator's signet. Tullia and Marcia's wheat flour appears again this time in a shallow basin mixed with water sea salt and a dash of fermented grape must. A scoop of batter falls through Vibia's fingers, thinner than toga linen, promising a crust light enough to float sturdy enough to cradle bones. You hand over the last coin you had earmarked for a second honey-glazed Letaria. Vibia grins, dunks a smelt cluster, and lowers it into the oil. The cauldron roars. Bubbles purl around each fish, sealing moisture inside a shell, fragile as eggshell speckled amber within heartbeats. While it fries, she sprinkles coarse ground coriander onto a flat tile, warming at the brazier's edge, aroma flicks of citrus and forest that recall Letaria's sesame pepper duet, tying land's spice to sea's brine. The first bite is a gentle explosion. The batter shatters like spun sugar, releasing a puff of steam, scented with tide pools at low ebb. Beneath, smelt flesh. Sweet, faintly nutty melts against your palate, its delicate bones brittle enough to chew. A drizzle of sharp Posca vinegar cuts the oil just as Point 10's honey once tempered wheat. Grain heat and acid perform a dance first choreographed generations ago by fishermen hungry for speed and sailors craving food that would not spoil before the second watch. Fricta Marina's story begins where river and sea meet. By midday, fishermen must either sell their catch-fresh salt at Fergarum or fry it for immediate profit. Frying wins hearts and coins fastest. A growing capital demands handheld snacks. Oil is abundant, flour cheap, and torches burn long after the moon's ascent. Unlike Lucanica, whose spice announces itself across alleys, seafood's perfume is fleeting. One must savor it moments from the cauldron, or lose both crunch and character. Vibia knows this and hypes urgency, hot now or cold regret. She bellows, flipping a skate wing big as a gladiator's shield. Technique dictates success. The oil must shimmer, yet never smoke. Overheated fat masks the ocean's sweetness. Batter ratio changes with species thinner for oily anchovies, thicker for leaner mullet cheeks. Vibia counts by I1 heartbeat for smelt 2 for anchovy, 3 for a fish head, heavier with cartilage. She rescues each piece with a reed skimmer, lets excess oil ghost away, then dusts it in. Salt laced with pulverized bay leaf. This last flourish bridges points 8 and 10. One more appearance of the laurel that scented Sopianum's broth and Letaria's griddle. Economically, Fricta Marina threads several industries. Fishermen sell off heads and tails shunned by banquet kitchens. Oil traders unload mid-grade presses perfect for frying. Millers move day-old flour in 20-pound sacks. herb peddlers hawk coriander celery seed, and rue to jazz up repetitive fare. The dish's democratic spirit shows in price a handful of smelt costs, a quadran's half, and as yet patricians pay triple for mullet throats, fried to silk, served on gilded plates. Even the emperor's chef, curious about street trends, allegedly borrowed Vibia's method to crisp red mullet tongues for a palace symposium. Thus, scraps morph into status when draped in novelty's robe. Doctors weigh in naturally. Galen praises fried smelt, cleanses phlegm, but warns against overindulgence lest the fourth humor simmer. Vibia counters by offering vinegar infusions of mint or dill, claiming they cool the liver. She hangs Galen's quote on a wax tablet, crossing out overindulgence and scribbling moderation measured by appetite. Customers laugh pockets, open fish vanish. Culturally, the friar's hiss provides city soundtrack. On festival eves, vendors compete for the loudest crackle. Crowds judge crispness by auditory thrill before tasting a morsel. At Poseidon's feast, sailors toss coins into oil before the first fish believing the flash of silver ward storms. Graffiti near the wharves reads, 2 smelts for courage, 3 for forgetfulness, hinting that hot oil salt and vinegar serve as both stimulant and solace for longshoremen bruised by labor. You alternate bites of smelt with swigs from a skin of watered wine lesson, learned from Point 8, letting acidity cleanse palate preparing for the next crunch. Anchovy discs follow their guts softened by frying into bursts of ocean jam. Then a mullet fin, the cartilaginous fan fries translucent crisp as parchment and oddly reminiscent of Lateria's lacy edge. Grain gave batter body. Fish returned favor with umami depth. Together, they echo Rome's genius for synthesis. Suddenly, Vibia lifts a battered fish head, high oil cascading like liquid bronze. Children cheer. Adults crowd closer. She sets it on a board, cracks the jaw, and reveals fried cheek morsels prized by gourmands. A young equestrian dandy, reluctant to soil silk sleeves, hires a urchin to debone for him, street ingenuity at play. Meanwhile, a stevedore buys the crispiest tails, crushes them into porridge back at Marius's tavern, inventing a hybrid dish that decades later scholars will argue birthed pescatarian sopianum. Critics exist. Stoics call the dish sensory excess. Vegetarians decry cruelty. Thrifty mothers complain fried fish inflates children's expectations. Yet lines at Vibia's stall stretch downriver. The city, after all, is fueled by contradictions, luxury and thrift piety, and pleasure land and sea. Batter whispers this truth, flour from inland fields, wraps creatures of salt water. Together, they transform in oil uniting provinces in one bite. You finish your final anchovy fingers glossy again, vinegar sharp in nostrils. Sunrise climbs the Capitoline. Vendors douse fires, citizens shoulder day's burdens. The forum's aroma mosaic rearranges honey from libum cooling on temple steps. Sausage smoke, fading now, replaced by faint sweetness of fig paste, pressed into wooden molds, an early hint of Point 12's forthcoming fig cakes, where fruit will replace fish, and oil will give way to slow-drying sun. As you depart, Vibia flicks batter dregs into embers, sparks rising like shoals scattering at dawn. The crackle fades just as the crunch in your mouth dissolves to memory. But the lesson lingers. Rome's appetite is tidal, surging from field to griddle river to cauldron, always returning to the grain that underpins batter and empire alike. Fricta Marina has bridged wheat cakes and sea catch, proving once more that in this city of 7 hills and countless mouths, nothing is wasted, least of all the chance to unite disparate flavors in the brief, perfect sizzle of hot oil. The briny echo of Vibia's Fricta Marina still tingles on your lips as you wander inland from the Tiber Point 11's sizzling union of grain and sea. giving way to the mellow hum of noon. Sunlight now spills over terracotta roofs, warming stone arcades, and coaxing a different fragrance from the stalls, one that trades salt and smoke for dusky sweetness. Follow that scent down a quieter colonnade where bees hover lazily above stacked reed baskets, and you'll find .12 Panis faculnus, the Roman fig cake, a portable square of summer preserved ready to soothe palates sated with oil and vinegar. A low table draped in linen fronts, a workshop run by Ilia and her 2 grown sons. The men slice fresh Adriatic figs into copper kettles, while Alia, nimble, despite 60 winters, plucks raisins from a drying rack and fans them into the bubbling mash. Steam rises like incense perfumed with desert honey and a grassy note from the fig skins. Where Vibia's cauldron roared with anxious bubbles, Alia's pot murmurs slow, thick plops that mirror the city's post-luncheon lull. The recipe is deceptively simple. First, green-tipped orbs too ripe for transport to patrician tables are trimmed and simmered in must the concentrated grape syrup left after wine presses close. As fruit surrenders its flesh, a coarse paste forms. Crushed hazelnuts tumble in next, followed by toasted sesame, the same seed that lent .10's Lateria their nutty lift, and a thread of spices saved from morning market ground, anise a shy pinch of cinnamon imported on Arabian caravans, and pepper's last cameo, a single twist to nod back to .9's Lucanica. When the mixture thickens enough to trail a spoon, it's poured onto wicker mats and sun-dried just long enough to lose its tack. Finally, Alia dusts the sheet with fine barley flour, then presses it flat beneath a slate slab rimmed with laurel branches, whose subtle scent bridges us once more to the bay leaf that danced through Sopianum's broth and Fricta marina's salt. Hours later, once the cake has set to a chewy consistency, the sons cut it into bricks no larger than a wax tablet. Each piece glows amber-flecked with near-black seeds that promise gentle crunch. Wrapped in fig leaves, nature's own parchment, the cakes stack neatly into earthenware jars, bound for wine shops, soldiers' packs, and desks of scribes who nibble while copying edicts. Handheld as a fried smelt, yet shelf-stable for months, Panis faculnus answers Rome's eternal challenge how to capture fleeting abundance and carry it through leaner days. You exchange a few scruffy coins. Alia's prices are kind, a motherly rebuke to luxury, then unfold a fig leaf to reveal a slice still warm from the press. The first bite yields soft resistance, like firm clay giving way to a sculptor's thumb. Sweetness spills not the bright blossom honey of globule or the flash of Lateria's glaze, but a mellow wine-dark note that coats the mouth and signals your brain to rest. Hazelnut fragments follow, offering the faint toastiness of Vibia's batter shards yet cushioned in fruit instead of oil. A few sesame seeds lodge between molars, sparking memories of morning cakes, while Anice's licorice sigh cools the finish. The entire experience is a lullaby in edible form, coaxing body and mind toward siesta. Fig cakes are older than the Republic if Pliny's natural history is to be trusted. Shepherds once carried rough fig bricks into the hills, feeding on slices as flocks grazed. Legions adopted the practice. A century of campaigning taught generals that fruit sugar revives morale faster than dried meat alone. Even philosophers kept a stash. The Stoic Epictetus claimed a fig cake. Anchors thought in the present, its modest sweetness enough to cheer without enslaving. And though Apicius filled scrolls with dormice and peacock tongues, he granted fig cakes a place seasoned with fennel flowers for breath like spring. Economically, Panis faculnus is a rural-urban handshake. Orchardists sell surplus fruit too bruised for crates. Vintners contribute, must they might otherwise discard. Beekeepers offload late-season honey thick as resin. Nut gatherers rake windfalls from Umbrian forests. Alia buys in small lots each morning, cheap, quick, flexible. Nothing travels far, yet everything tastes of somewhere else. Figs from Etruria's volcanic soils, hazelnuts from Sabine Hills, sesame from Syria. Each brick is a mosaic of provinces bound together by patient simmering rather than hot oil or roaring flame. Doctors applaud the cake's humors. Galen prescribes it for melancholy, citing gentle purge without chill. Scribonius notes it restores spent seed and thus recommends a slice to gladiators before evening bouts. Even austere Cato allowed fig bricks in rations for slaves building his farm walls. Proof that practicality sometimes tempers thrift. Culture drapes symbolic layers over this modest dessert. At weddings, brides gift fig cakes to future mothers-in-law, wishing sweetness within new bonds. During the festival of Fornicalia, bakers donate baskets to Vesta's temple, each cake cut into wheat sheaf shapes, so forge smoke of hearth and sun, heat of orchard mingle in a single mouthful. Slaves who rarely taste licit honey hide chips of cake in tunic hems for clandestine midnight feasts, calling it moon bread because it glows pale under lamplight. Yet critics grumble. Some argue figs inflame the belly. Others sneer that hazelnuts cheapen texture. Epicures shrug, claiming their palates require sharper thrills. But Alia's queue never dwindles. Her cake does not dazzle. It endures. In a city that ricochets daily between decadence and destitution, endurance wins wallets and hearts. You devour the last bite and realize every flavor since dawn now nestles on your tongue, the wine of sopianum pepper, of sausage sesame, of cakes, brine of smelt, and dusk sweet, of figs layered like tiles along the Via Sacra. Just as the empire overlays cultures, so your palate overlays notes. Each point in this journey building toward a portrait of abundance and thrift coexisting. The sun angles west. Shutters swing closed. A child chases his own shadow along the portico. Aulia sprinkles barley dust over fresh sheets of fig paste, the flour floating like lazy midges in sunbeams. Beyond another aroma rises vegetal slightly sulfurous, hinting at pickled cabbage and boiled herbs, a signal of Point 13's savory detour into hangover cures and drinking snacks, where Rome's tavern culture meets medical lore in a brine-bright clash. But before turning you pocket an extra fig cake, its leaf wrapping cool against your hand. It feels like a promise that sweetness can travel nourish and remind you tomorrow of the flavors you tasted today. Point 12, then, is not just a bridge from fried fish to restorative bites. It is the empire's lesson in preservation, turning fleeting fruit into slow-burn energy day's bounty into night's solace. The hectic agora into a quiet corner of chewy calm. The leaf-wrapped fig cake from Point 12 rests like a cool stone in your pouch, its wine-dark sugar slowly dissolving the salt still clinging to your lips. Afternoon shadows stretch across the forum, and with them comes a familiar Roman predicament. Too much of everything wine heat. Crowds, business, politics. The empire sustains itself on constant motion, yet it also cultivates remedies for its own excess. Follow the faint tang of vinegar dill and cured fish into a vaulted capona tucked behind the Temple of Castor, and you'll arrive at Point 13. The cibus adversus ebrietatem. The snack countermeasures Romans swear will keep drinkers upright or rescue them come dawn. Inside, lamps already flicker amber against damp brick. Amphorae of cheap red sit tilted on trestles, their clay necks sticky with resin. Between them stands Florus, a broad-shouldered innkeeper with eyes red from wood smoke and laughter. He ladles watered wine into clay beakers, but pushes a wooden platter toward each patron before the first sip. Prevention before repentance, he jokes. introducing the night's defensive lineup. First is panis sopsis, yesterday's coarse bread soaked in diluted wine and a dash of honeyed vinegar. Unlike Sopianum's leisurely porridge, 0.8 these wine cakes come chilled, squeezed nearly dry, and rolled in ground cumin. One bite delivers cool acidity and faint sweetness that prick the palate awake. The porous crumb absorbs alcohol lingering in the mouth, slowing uptake in the stomach. At least so Flores claims, echoing advice cribbed from Cato's agricultural notes. The snack links back to the fig cake you carry, both repurposed leftovers, proving that Rome's culinary ingenuity shines brightest when thrift meets need. Next come ova versata raw eggs cracked into beakers of mulled wine, then whipped with a slender twig of rosemary until they form a frothy custard cloud. Patrons knock it back in 2 gulps, coating their throats with protein that allegedly locks drunken vapors in the belly. The rosemary's pine bite recalls the laurel you tasted in batter and fig pressings, binding this restorative chapter to flavors of points 10, 11, 12. Flores grins at queasy novices hesitating over the glass. An egg now saves a headache later. The third remedy is brassica frita, cumanitho ribbons of cabbage blanched, dredged in barley flour, fried in olive oil, and tossed with salt and dill seed. Steam rises, carrying sulfur and herb, an aroma many Romans associate with sobriety's return. The crunch echoes Vibia's smelt batter, yet replaces fish umami with vegetal minerality. Galen swore cabbage purges wine's noxious spirit from the blood. Philosophers add that its humble origin grounds the mind. You taste a leaf outer crisp gives way to yielding sweetness, fresh enough to rinse fig sugar from your gums. Finally, Flores unveils salsamentum aceticum shredded salt-cured mackerel steeped in sharp vinegar garlic and lovage. Presented in a shallow dish, it glitters silver and ivory. Diners scoop morsels with fingertips, letting brine and acid jolt weary senses. The flavor path runs opposite to the fig cake's mellow wine notes, yet the two share a purpose preservation. Where Panis faculnus secures summer fruit, salsamentum secures the sea's bounty, both designed to travel time and distance until needed. Patrons oscillate between these dishes as conversation swells. A notary recounts Senate gossip. A charioteer wagers on the green faction. A mosaicist sketches vine scrolls on a wax tablet, steadying his stylus between cabbage bites. Each mouthful resets equilibrium, allowing more wine without tipping balance, at least for a while. Flores keeps pitchers moving, but insists every refill be preceded by one of his anchors. He even offers a combo plate named Tranquilitas at a slight discount, betting customers will remember his kindness and his cures after sunrise. Economically, this niche cuisine thrives on marginal goods. Cabbage grows in market gardeners' off-plots. Bread is surplus. Eggs excess from backyard hens. Mackerel the tail end of garum production. Vinegar comes from wine gone tart, the very emblem of transformation. Small risk reliable demand, sailors downing farewell cups, scribes pulling late shifts. Bridesmaids pacing off nerves before wedding dawn. Their coins clink into Flores's till, underwriting his steady supply of fresher amphorae than a copona of this size might otherwise afford. Physicians debate effectiveness. Scribonius concedes raw egg sheaths the stomach, but warns those prone to phlegm. Pliny extols cabbage for everything short of resurrecting the dead, though even he admits the dish's after-smell offends polite company. Stoics roll eyes, yet partake, citing oikiosis, care for the self. Epicureans delight in the sensory play, hot wine versus cold bread, silky egg versus prickly dill, sweet fig memory against salty fish spark. The very tension among flavors becomes argument that pleasure and prudence may coexist. Culturally, these anti-drunk foods acquire ritual gravity. During Saturnalia, revelers march between house parties clutching cabbage leaves like amulets. Veterans of Bacchic rites swear by eggs in wine as a sacred seal against madness. Brides on the eve of marriage nibble fig cake at dusk, cabbage at dawn, balancing desire and duty. Graffiti near the Subura reads, "Eat the egg and conquer the jug part." Instruction part, dare. You assemble your own sequence, a sip of egg froth wine that coats the throat, a quick chase of vinegar mackerel that lights the sinuses, a cabbage chip to add crunch, finally a bite of fig cake, the day's earlier sweetness bridging present brine. The flavors clash, then settle into unexpected accord, like dissonant chords resolving into calm. Your head clears, limbs grow lighter. Whether science or suggestion, Floris's quartet delivers a feeling of reset, paving the way for whatever evening still holds. Outside sunset backlights the Capitoline in molten gold. Vendors shutter stalls. Somewhere a flute strikes a minor mode that drifts through open doorways. The buzz of the capona rises proof that prevention fuels indulgence in an endless Roman loop. Yet the aroma morphs again. From a nearby alcove wafts the musky scent of well-aged cheese kissed by honey and cloaked in pepper, a reminder of those garum-drenched globuli from Point 2. But tonight, the cheese stands alone in aged glory, a firm crystalline wheel shaved into translucent petals. This is the appetizer for Point 14's exploration of Rome's cult of Cassius Vetus, the sharp, mature cheeses that ride alongside medicinal herbs and keep tavern talk crackling into the small hours. For now, you thank Floris, slip another fig brick into your pouch beside the first, and step into the cooling street. Point 13 has stitched a safety net from thrift and folk wisdom, binding land's cabbage seas mackerel vineyards vinegar and barnyard's egg into a defense against Rome's headiest pleasures. It reminds you that an empire able to invent excess is equally adept at inventing antidotes, and that sometimes the cure tastes just as vivid as the cause. Floris's copona was still echoing with jokes about raw egg chasers when a richer, nut-sweet scent drifted through the steam of dill-fried cabbage. A stocky Etruscan named Spurius Vellianus had shouldered in from the dusk, rolling a pine bough-packed wheel of cheese onto the counter. The innkeeper welcomed him like a medic on campaign-aged cheese he said was the surest way to keep talk lively after the vinegar mackerel and cabbage cures of the previous round. Vellianus had hauled 3 styles down from the volcanic caves of Volsinio, a year-old ewe's milk wheel rubbed with olive ash and fennel seed, a young cow's milk drum ripened in fig leaves until its paste tasted of green almond, and squat cylinders of curd threaded with black pepper, later cold-smoked over grapevine trimmings. Unlike the melting globuli you tasted in the afternoon, or the honey fritters that opened your night, these cheeses needed no cooking, no batter, no sweet glaze. They arrived complete dense with salt crystals sharp enough to cut through wine fog, and perfectly suited to the preventive snacks Floris had pressed on every patron since our hangover lesson in Point 13. With a bronze harp-string knife, Vellianus shaved translucent petals from the oldest wheel. Each curl folded in on itself, releasing aromas of toasted hay and warm lanolin that fluttered free only when they hit the tongue. The softer fig leaf drum he sliced into fat wedges, then brightened with a bead of emerald oil, so vivid it recalled the first hiss of lateria batter on a griddle hours ago. The peppered cylinders cracked like dry wood when split their jet kernels glittering against ivory curd, and echoing the spice burst of Lucanica links still lingering faintly on your palate. Floris laid these slivers beside the very remedies we met earlier. Buttery petals next to briny mackerel, grassy wedges alongside wine-soaked bread cubes, peppered chunks sharing a dish with vinegar-sharp cabbage. Fat dulled acid salt, balanced sweetness spice, rewoke the tongue. The tavern felt suddenly brighter, as though someone had turned the lamps up rather than down. Aged cheese in Rome was less a delicacy than portable currency. Shepherds stacked wheels on juniper boards in limestone caves, letting each season leave a signature summer's heat, drove out way autumn's cool, allowed molds to bloom. Winter's rest perfumed the paste. Vellianus stamped his rind with the constellation rising at the first turning, so buyers could read the flavor calendar in starlight. A 6-pound wheel might fetch 2 denaries, yet a tavern could shave it thin enough to flavor 50 cups of watered wine, turning cost into steady profit. The peppered loaves earned more. India's spice was dear, and every cracked kernel became sales theater when it popped between a drinker's molars. Doctors had opinions, of course. Galen praised year-old used cheese for drying excess humors, but warned that wheels left too long breadstones in the kidneys. Florus settled the paradox with portion control, insisting thin shavings sharpened rhetoric without clogging organs. Stoics frowned at luxury, yet conceded a sliver quickened their logic, while Epicureans took the sharper view that life's small stings heightened pleasure. An epigram painted above the bar condensed the debate. No wisdom without cheese. Patrons quoted it with mock solemnity, reaching for another curl. Cheese also greased the wheels of late-night politics. A junior tribune traded slices of ash-rinded Vetus for whispered votes to delay a grain tax motion. 2 poets spun impromptu couplets, each winning a pepper-studded cube for a clever line, while a Gaulish trader swapped a silver brooch for a slab to carry on tomorrow's road, claiming pungent memories traveled better than promises. Romance found its cue too. A seamstress who had bravely downed Florus's raw egg concoction earlier tasted the fig leaf cheese and smiled at the soldier who offered it the tangy bite, sealing an unspoken bargain more neatly than any vow. These wheels had deep roots in Roman ritual. Shepherd King Evander was said to have served aged curd to Hercules on the Palatine Hill. Families crumbled specks onto ancestor tombs during parentalia, so the sharp scent could draw spirits back to the feast. Children strung beads of smoked pepper cheese with dried figs at Saturnalia, wearing edible necklaces they could nibble between dice throws. Vellianus honored that lineage by branding faint river bends into each rind with a heated stylus, though few patrons noticed the markings before the knives went to work. You began with a petal of Vitus, which melted into roasted chestnut and straw, an earthy sigh that balanced the vinegar still tingling from Florus's fish. The fig leaf cheese followed its soft paste, opened with flavors of sweet cream and sap. A gentle cousin to the fig cake in your pouch. Last came the piperatus salt, struck first, then pepper, then a ghost of grapevine smoke that cleared your sinuses more effectively than dill-laced cabbage ever dared. With a swallow of diluted red, these 3 notes formed an edible chord. Low, middle, high, leaving your mouth alert, your head level, and the night suddenly young again. The progression echoed every stage of today's journey, the salt and fat punch of garum-drenched fried cheese, the honey warmth of globuli and fig cakes, the pepper fireworks of sausage, the oily crackle of smelt, the vinegary snap of mackerel, now distilled into concentrated crystals of curd. Yet these flavors also pointed forward. Around the bar, conversation drifted toward distant festivals, Carthage's sacrifices, Eleusis' harvest rites, Persia's spring fires, hinting at the panoramic narrative of Point 15 still to come. Before leaving, you tucked a small triangle of Vetus into your satchel beside the fig bricks, confident that its sharp tang would outduel any lingering wine at sunrise. Out on the cobblestones, the air tasted of peppered rind pine dust and possibility, and the city's endless conversation rolled on behind you like laughter slipping under a tavern door. Point 14. Stripped of headings and bullet lists is simply this aged cheese, arriving in the nick of time to bind tonight's cures to tomorrow's stories, proving that when Rome sharpens milk into salt and crystal, it also sharpens tongue's memories, and perhaps even the will to keep walking straight after more cups than you care to count. The wedge of ash-rinded cheese you tucked beside the fig bricks cools against your hip as dawn's first lavender smudge slides above Rome's roofline. Point 14's tavern clamor fades behind you, yet its pepper-sharp tang still needles your palate, stirring talk the way Spurious's curd had loosened every tongue at Floris's bar. Those late-night stories of empires, marched gods appeased, and seasons turned echo now in the near-silent forum, urging you to trace their tangled roots. That is how the day's last stop becomes a journey far beyond Food Point 15. A rolling tapestry of ancient festivals and historic feats, all glimpsed through the flavors that have traveled with you since morning. It begins on the stones beneath your sandals, laid centuries after a Phoenician general named Hamilcar Barca paced Carthage's harbor, planning to feed an army on dried figs and salted fish while expanding his city's reach across the Mediterranean. Locals still whisper that the sharp, almost smoky note in Volsini's peppered cheese can chase its pedigree to those Punic sailors who packed curd rubbed with date honey and spices for weeks at sea. When Hannibal Hamilcar's lion-hearted son marched war elephants through alpine snow, his quartermasters issued a similar ration hard cheese and fig bricks, nearly identical to the panis faculnus in your pouch. Soldiers sucked the sweet paste when mountain air burned their lungs. They gnawed the cheese for salt that coaxed water back into weary muscles. Wars ended, empires shifted, but the pairing survived, slipping into Roman cupboards like a surrendered sword repurposed as plowshare. Turn a corner, and incense drifts from the Temple of Ceres, where priestesses rehearse hymns for the august Eleusinian rites, import echoes of Greece into the city's own calendar. Tomorrow at twilight, initiates will sip a barley and mint kykeon, said to unlock secret visions. In tavern gossip, Floris had sworn the drink tastes eerily close to sopianum sprinkled with dill, the same thrift-born porridge that steadied your step after Lucanica's pepper fire. Pilgrims swear by a pocket of fig cake to keep hunger quiet during the long fasting hours before revelation. Some nibble a curl of aged used cheese just beforehand, claiming its crystalline salt draws hidden truths to the tongue. No scroll confirms the ritual, yet the habit persists, living proof that sacred and ordinary often share a spice rack. Down by the river priests of Amun march in linen kilts beside painted barges rehearsing for the autumn Opet festival, transplanted from Thebes to this northern capital. They chant to drums while workers drag cedar poles ready to hoist canopies bright with lapis and gold. Between verses, acolytes chew roasted chickpeas. Point 3's humble sicer, because Egyptian scrolls praise the legume for steadying the breath before long hymns. Later, when processional crowds swarm the embankment, Vibia's battered smelt will hiss in oil, and the mingled perfumes of Nile and Tiber will rise together, twinning two river gods in invisible incense. Closer to winter, Saturnalia will explode across these streets in a carnival of role reversals. You already tasted its herald last night, pepper-speckled cheese curls strung with dried figs worn as edible jewelry by gamblers rattling knucklebone dice. During the festival proper, Floris will rope garlands of Lucanian sausage above his doorway, each link an invitation to drop the year's restraints. Yet even riot needs ballast and cabbage fried with dill. Point 13's brassica frita will fly from tavern pans faster than wine can be poured a crispy green break on excess acknowledged since the Republic's earliest ledgers. Spring creeps back, and Persian traders unload emerald green boxes of pistachios for Nowruz, the vernal new year, that paints the market in silks and sweet smoke. They barter for Roman honey, then buy wheels of young fig-leaf cheese whose grassy brightness mirrors orchard buds. At dawn on equinox, they will set a Haftsinn table in a Trastevere courtyard, where sesame-flecked Lateria cakes stand in for the traditional sabzi herb plate, because grain is, after all, green life paused in seed. When neighbors wander by, curious the traders slice cheese into the same honey they traded away days earlier, proving that celebration is fluent in substitutions. By early summer, the Odeon's marble seats quiver with chants from the city Dionysia, imported from Athens. Actors rehearse tragedies, while stagehands munch vinegar-slick mackerel and tear bites from coarse bread soaked in cheap red, a rough cousin to Floris's panis sopsis. Between acts, they crunch peppered cheese cubes for courage before slipping into goatskin masks, trusting the stinging fat to anchor them amid thunderous choruses. After sunset, the audience spills out tipsy fingers stained with grape must bellies, lined with cabbage ribbons, sold by enterprising vendors, invoking Delphi's maxim, nothing in excess, even as they hawk second portions. And on a crescent moon night in early Adar, you may turn down a Hellenized alley and find the Jewish quarter lit by oil lamps, flickering against parchment-painted scenes of Esther. Children whirl rattles to drown out Haman's name, then bite into sweet pastries shaped like his hat. Between songs, they pass plates of honey-glazed cheese fritters globuli without garum, because exile conserves memory not only in scrolls, but in taste. The sharp curves of Spurius's ash-rinded wheel rarely cross their tables, yet his young fig-leaf round often does its subtle sweetness, harmonizing with dried fruit wine, served to welcome the season's turn from threat to relief. Each festival rewrites the menu slightly, yet one thread runs through them, all the empire's genius for repurposing surplus into symbol. Wheat becomes batter, becomes armor against hunger. Figs become bricks that survive a campaign. Cabbage leaves flip from humble field fare to philosopher-endorsed remedy. Cheese wheels harden into coin and story at once. Even the tavern chatter that carried you here, war elephants, mystery cults, river gods, travels the same route as spice and vinegar, riding on caravans and in sailors' shaggy memories, until it crystallizes in food that tastes of everywhere at once. Now, as the sun lifts fully above the Capitoline trade stalls creak open, and morning's first lucanica coils sizzle anew, you break off a shard of the cheese wedge saved from last night. Its lanolin bloom meets the orchard sweetness still hiding in your last fig brick, and salt wakes the edges of sleep still clouding your thoughts. The flavor is yesterday's road and today's horizon, at once proof that every mile an empire spans is recast on the tongue. Point 15 isn't a single dish, but the vast table set by history itself, where infantry rations evolve into pilgrim snacks, where sacred fasts borrow tavern tricks, where winter's cure turns into spring's necklace. Linking back to Point 14's late-night cheese, it reminds you that the sharpest tastes linger not because they overwhelm, but because they carry a story precise enough to guide you from one dawn to the next, across wars, across rivers, across rites that promise the world can be remade the moment flavor strikes the rim of a cup or the edge of a knife.